So it's really lovely. A number of us have been taking classes together on these Tuesday nights for the last three months and change, something like that. We had a class on foundational Buddhist teachings and what was the last one? Ethics or sila, which is actually one of the points that or one of the paramitas in the whole series of paramitas that we're studying in this series. And since I do know we have a number of people here watching right now or online on the screen or first time in this hall in a class, I just thought I'd give some quick kind of grounding information to help put us all in a container together. So first of all, my name is Genjo. I'm the instructor for your class. I don't have a syllabus for you because it's not written. However, I've been conscripted to teach this class. And so Genjo is a Dharma name. So many people you might have heard when we were going around, people have said a Japanese name. And so that name comes from a particular ceremony that we've all taken, taking the precepts or sort of officially becoming Zen Buddhists, for lack of a better term for it. So I go by that name mostly out in the world and in other communities I roll in. And so I've been practicing here for about 10 years in this community. I started living here as an undergrad and finishing my degree while practicing here. And I was ordained about 5 years ago, and about a year and change of that time was spent practicing in several monasteries in Japan. And right now my arc of training, I've almost finished the 5-year commitment that Ejo asks for as kind of a novice monk, sort of priest formation. And so in October, I'll have my coming of age ceremony, kind of like my Zen bar mitzvah. And it'll be a very exciting moment for the community. Not really what's happening for me, but actually Ejo is officially being installed as the abbot of the community. So he's been the spiritual leader for 18 years or so since the inception of Buddha Eye Temple. However, that kind of particular ceremony that'll happen, he'll be installed as the abbot, which means something really important for his life and career, as well as for the maturation of this temple. So stay tuned for that. In terms of this community, we call ourselves a Zen community temple, and I think that term is really, we're shooting to offer a kind of openness that while Zen practice is one of the central things that we do here on a daily basis, there's quite formal meditation practice and ceremonial space from the Zen lineage. We also hope to be broader and more inclusive than that. And so in non-COVID times, we like to have yoga classes going and Tai Chi or Qigong, and have pizza parties once or twice a year, as well as art shows and such. In addition, some people live here. I live here. There are 4 of us here right now, and it can feel a bit full sometimes upstairs. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of paths of practice. So many people have been here training for 18 years with Ejo and have taken on forms of leadership within the Dharma in this community. And then some of us are also training to become priests. And so there we're really studying to carry on the forms and practices of this tradition and making that our vocation. So there's all sorts of things happening here at the temple. And a children's program will be up and running, hopefully, in a number of months. We'll be building a new building for that out here soon. I don't know if you can pan over there. Probably not. No, not going to happen. So anywho, we're growing new grass. Very exciting developments are happening. Any other kind of like broad questions about this place, this community? I hope everyone can feel, seen and held, no matter, how long you've been coming here, if it's your first time or otherwise. Good. Smiling faces from online. That's good. So I guess I'll just jump into the kind of nuts and bolts of how we're going to be spending the next 6 weeks together. So there was registration for this class, and in one sense that's a bit ceremonial. There's no, we asked for full participation from people, and in a way that's just kind of a support for you on those if you're tired on a Tuesday evening after a full day, because You tend to get so much more out of something if you stick with it all the way through. And also it's a support to everyone else when people are showing up and we're cultivating some space together over these 6 weeks. So please come. Please, I don't know if you have to kind of drag your face on the pavement some days. Please do that sometimes. Otherwise, when you can't come for whatever reason, as you decide, you're welcome not to. And I do like it if you send an email. That just feels nice. It feels close. So if like 10 people are out and we have no idea why, we can sort of share that information and feel a bit rounder together as a group. And there's no fee for this class. Something I think that's really beautiful about how we hold practice together here at Buddha Eye. Probably another resident. Is that all Dharma teachings and classes and even full retreats are offered free of charge. So there's no preset amount that people have to pay to even come for a full retreat, which I happily took advantage of as a young college student and felt really grateful for. So you're welcome here, and you're also welcome to make a donation or an offering to the community. And that helps keep the lights on, helps pay our head teacher a living wage to support his family, and even provides some of us novices here in training a small stipend. So your offerings are really appreciated. There's a book for this class if you're feeling inspired. Here it is. It's called The Six Perfections by Dale Wright. It's really great. And I'm always surprised when I teach these classes how much people have been willing to bite off and read. And so this text is not, it's not expected you will read this. You will be able to keep up with the class great if you don't open this book at all. However, you will become much rounder in these ideas and path of practice if you do take up reading of this guy. He does a really great job of providing quite traditional images and examples and understandings of these paramitas, as well as he goes into kind of a modern, contemporary, humanistic critique, which I think is quite useful in some ways to let other parts of your being into these traditional teachings. I would say if I had a bone or like a complaint to lodge with Dale, which this is dangerous to do now that these talks are recorded. Sometimes I can have the feeling that his offering is a bit too clean and fairly intellectual and sometimes feeling a bit heady for me. And although he's oftentimes talking about the challenging parts of human life and what it means to open those up and transform them, sometimes I just feel there's not enough like sinew and like blood and pus and sperm, like something just totally inviting and invoking the dark parts of human life, the brokenness, the addictions, the poverty, things in there that, I don't know, have tended to break my soul open in a certain kind of way. So I offer that. That's my one critique. And maybe you'll love his style and be so happy that stuff isn't present, but that's just my take. And so overall, I think he does an awesome job to bring this teaching into your gut in a different kind of way. So we've just ordered 5 books for the temple. So 3 of those will end up in our library here, so you're welcome to check those out. There's a little checkout thing, and I usually tell people if you don't bring the book back within a year, we might bother you. We're not really good at getting our books back. And also 2 or so will be for sale in the library if you want to buy them for here, but it's available pretty much anywhere. So in terms of the flow of the class, I'll probably lecture almost every time, so sort of sorry, not sorry. Sometimes that'll be longer or shorter and more or less permeable to your questions. Sometimes it'll be like, okay, this is a pretty full offering I hope to make, kind of try and holster your questions for the end. Other times, I'll really invite your participation and musings and be pretty happy to go down various wormholes. So I'll be when in doubt, feel free to jump in and I will sort of let you know. We'll have some dialogue in that situation or say, I'm gonna get to it later or hold off for a bit. So yeah, and almost always I'll like to start off class or finish class with time for comments and questions. homework, sometimes there's homework. In fact, usually I give a little bit of homework. And for me, that just helps cultivating a feeling of connectedness between us. So if we just meet 6 times, one off, I think it can be hard to have a feeling of flow through all of that. So even if the homework is sometimes like, think about this and come prepared to talk about it if you feel inspired next class. Or write something. One of the most enjoyable things I've done in these kinds of classes is have someone or have everyone chew on something and write a small paragraph, and then I'll collect everyone's responses and send that out to the entire group. It feels like a really nice way to learn from each other and kind of the limited time constraints we have. And so I'll often send kind of a follow-up email. Actually, I will. After every class, I'll send a little follow-up email, and that'll actually have the recordings, both audio and visual. Is that what we call that? A video recording. And thank you to Joichi and Dokyu, who will likely be taking that up for us, our tech monks and novices and postulants here. And I'll also include any additional resources or handouts that I learned from and thought were interesting, or maybe just shared a snippet of, but I might include the full text if people want to chase that down further. I think lastly is kind of special considerations for folks online. So I mentioned that you are seen right now, and you can also speak. So we have speakers hooked up, and if you ever want to jump in and ask a question, you can just unmute yourself and go for it. Is that not a true statement? Did you just shake your head? Okay, there's a thumbs up. Yeah, we're set up for that. And also, I wanted to share a few points about Zoom practice that we're trying to cultivate here at the temple. And the camera, you all, I can see you right now, and just as much as possible, if you can have your camera on, it's much appreciated. Yeah, just in general feeling of connectivity. And a couple of weeks ago in class, I said what I thought was a funny joke, and the hall was completely quiet, but I could see everyone online was laughing really hard. It's kind of an odd juxtaposition. It's actually happening right now, or it was a second ago. So, anywho, thank you, and bonus points if you laugh at my jokes. So. Any other questions about kind of general flow of the class and how things will work? Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And I didn't prepare this, but it seems like a good point to talk about my hopes and dreams and intentions for the class. That seems important. In general, I think we can have pretty narrow ideas of what path is and what like a good life would look like. And I think the perfections, this formulation of path, really does quite a beautiful job of opening us to something broader and bigger than we could have ever imagined. And in one sense, they help give us the courage to leap and to shoot for something, and also to open up a kind of trust at the same time. And so maybe my only hope and dream is that I know that they've been important for me in that regard, and that we can lean into each other's understandings and learn from each other and have some taste of that as a group. That would be my hope. So, we'll see. That's the plan. So, for the rest of the class, it looks like we might have time for discussion afterwards, which will be great. But I'll give a little lecture just to kind of open up this topic, the 6 perfections, the paramitas. But before we do that, any other thoughts, burning questions, inspirations? Do you have an intention for this class? If I could fish out one response, I'd be super stoked. If anyone's willing to jump in.
On the topic of attending all of the classes, I missed the last one. for the last session. And I went back and listened to the recording, and it touched me how I missed being there. And so there's part of me that regrets that. And it's just, I wish that I had. And so I just want to share that, because it's not often that you get the ability to like actually go and listen to the thing that you could have been part of, and like I'm like, oh, I would have liked to have said something there, or like, oh man, that would have been cool to be part of that interaction. And so yeah, it's just very valuable to kind of feel the whole thing through. So I want to share that with the room.
Oh, thank you. And I did not pay him any money to say that. It was a really good last class.
Yeah.
I'm shocked what you can do together in like 6, or I guess it ends up being like 7 hours of class exactly. With the right container, cultivating the right container. And amazingly, we seem to be able to do that even with people here online, and some amount of permeability. So, it feels very special. Okay, I guess I'll jump into lecturing then. So these 6 perfections, these 6 paramitas, what is going on here? And so, hoping to just set the stage for what we're talking about is that these 6 perfections are the kind of central core idea or framework within a very large body of literature within our particular kind of broad school of Buddhism. So that broad school of Buddhism is called the Mahayana, and this literature that I'm talking about is commonly referred to as the Prajnaparamita texts. And it's interesting, these texts, they come in all shapes and sizes. Well, how do we put this? The length like telescopes in and out. So there's a very large, the largest version of it that they have in Japanese takes up something like 200 volumes of books. So actually one of them is up there on the altar. That's actually to the Buddha's left is the statue right there. That's Prajnaparamita, so a statue of the embodied perfection of wisdom, often called the womb or the embryo of the Tathagatas. We'll talk about that language later. But next to her right there is that volume. That's an important, really special particular volume there. But so imagine 200 of those is sort of the largest version that we have, all the way down to, we'll say, the word ah, which contains all of it. Or the next shortest version, which many of you have chanted here regularly. Well, the very last part of it is gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhiswaha. Or the next one is the Heart Sutra. So we chant that here every Sunday, up to the Diamond Sutra, which we study here regularly, and then the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, in 20,000 lines, in 100,000 lines, up to the large version. So it's just interesting that that's the form that it comes to us. It's kind of malleable in that way to deliver its teaching. And so within that, this word paramita, who here is actually familiar with that idea? These paramitas, that they come from that body of literature. Could I see some hands? It'll help me know how much like flesh to put on this. Okay, good. So just a handful of us. You'll hear about, if you spend time here at the temple, Ejo is very fond of these teachings, and so is our school in general, so you'll be hearing about them. And now would probably be a good time for those of you online to pull up the PDF that I sent everyone, which actually just happens to be words that I wrote. And this has been just living on my wall for the last couple weeks or so to help massage these words and ideas into my heart mind. And I was looking at them today and I was like, well, everyone could look at these too. And they're nice big fonts, you can read them really easily. So the first word, the English word there is the translation we have of a Sanskrit term that points to, I guess, something sort of beyond what our translation can really get. So I'll be using these words not so much in the beginning, but hopefully towards the end of the class, we'll know exactly when I say Kashanti that I'm talking about patience, or forbearance, another translation of it, or prajna paramita, wisdom mother of the Buddhas. So that's just a little point in there that getting familiar with those terms will be helpful for our class. And then this term paramita, that's the word I've been saying is perfection. It has quite a bit to unpack about it. It's quite beautiful. So I'll say a few words about that now. So the term paramita, commonly translated as perfection, has two etymologies. The first derives from the word parama, meaning highest, most distant, and hence chief, primary, most excellent. Thus, we can clearly see the translation of excellence or perfection. And yet a more creative and widely reported etymology derives paramita into para and mita, with para meaning beyond, the further bank, shore, or boundary, and mita meaning that which has arrived, or ita meaning that which goes. Paramita, in this case, then means that which has gone beyond, that which goes beyond, or transcendent. So we have the two meanings there, that kind of very easy word and phrase of perfection, right? Which actually is kind of like for many people, it's kind of a non-starter, not a very inviting word, whereas I think many people feel kind of some attraction to this that which goes beyond, or that which has gone beyond, that which reaches the other shore is often a way it's talked about. Transcendent, I don't really like that word. You might like it though. So these 6 going beyonds, these 6 crossing overs, that's what we're talking about here. And so in one sense, they're both the goal and the vehicle to reach the goal. I think that's a really interesting point, the other shore and that which goes to the other shore. And here in Buddhism, when we talk about that goal, we're talking about nirvana, the cessation of suffering. And when we talk about the vehicle, that word we commonly call path or practice. And in our school, actually, this works out really nicely. Practice and enlightenment are never held as separate things. That when you are drawn towards practicing, you are deeply moored by your own awakening mind, whether you can see that or not. That both are arising together in you, whether you know it or not. And so this will be quite a bit of what that's a lot to drop right there, but even in this word paramita, we can see there's such an invitation to a whole kind of teaching right there. And then further, how each one of these is a gate, a facet, a flow of this perfection, this crossing over, encapsulated sort of as one thing, but as part of another whole thing. So just to touch the surface on that, and we'll spend lifetimes unraveling that. But historically speaking, it's interesting to think about how we got to this particular formation of path. And basically, you're getting this version because you walked into a temple and this is our lineage. So many people would be familiar with the Eightfold Path, for example. That was the earliest formation of path laid out by the Buddha in one of his very first teachings of the Dharma. But after the Buddha passed into parinirvana, or passed away, broadly speaking, there was a split in the school between a more conservative faction and a more liberal faction of Buddhism. It's actually quite funny. I told this story in the last class, and actually, Gayla, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you know something about this. But apparently, the Buddha, before he died, said to his closest attendant, Ananda, please, you should know that we should get rid of the 20 minor rules in the code of ethics and morality. Feel free, we can get rid of those. And Ananda was so surprised, and they talked about it a little bit. He's like, you can change it? And he said, yes, you can change it. And then after the Buddha's death, Ananda showed up to a council that was called together to sort of formulate what it really meant to be a follower of the Buddha now. and what was really important to figure out what were the rules they were going to follow. And Ananda told them this, and they were like, oh wow, how wonderful. So what are the 20 we can get rid of? And he said, I forgot to ask. And it was really, everyone had a different idea of what those 20 minor rules were. And I wonder if it wasn't like a deeply skillful means of the Buddha to not say. But it threw sort of the Sangha into turmoil, because the whole carrier of what it meant to be a monk and in the school meant following these particular rules. And so to not have a clear idea of what that was really threatening to be able to carry forward the tradition. And so in a very simplistic narrative, there was a split. And there were those who decided to take up what we now call the Forest Elders School, which would be the more conservative kind of letter of the law Buddhists in India at that time. And the group that sort of went into the north was what we now call the Mahayana, and a group that favored being able to change and move some of the rules around, which made the practice of Buddhism possible in other places. So for example, the robes I wear now, I'm not in my full regalia right now, but the robes I wear right now are very different. And I think it would have been nearly impossible for Buddhism to go up into very cold Tibet if there couldn't be other layers on underneath the robe, because traditionally you could only own like 6 things, and like half of those things were your robes, not a lot of clothing. And there were other really tight cultural, specific time, place things buried in the practice of Buddhism at that time, which sort of made it prohibitive to practice with ease in other cultures, times, and places. So that's a very simplistic sort of narrative to draw there, but that general shift in Buddhism historically was really important for the development of this path. So while at that time the path was very much the Eightfold Path was the way that practice was thought about, as Buddhists moved into a different world and different time and place, they started wondering, okay, what is the path now? Now that we're feeling some distance from this Eightfold Path exactly as it was laid out. And there were these narratives drawn about the Buddha practicing to become a Buddha in his past lives. And they were like, what was cultivated there? What was attended to? And this idea came out that there were these 10 perfections, that these core central values that the Buddha in lifetime after lifetime, moment after moment, cultivated and attended to and learned from and like honed sharper and sharper and sharper until they were perfected, or he went to the other shore of nirvana in his lifetime as Shakyamuni Buddha. And so that sort of, movement or separating from the lived practice of the Eightfold Path opened up something more broad that's given rise to this formation of path that we have here. And so there are a couple different formulations of how these perfections work, and in the Pali Sutras or in the Theravada school, they'll talk about the 10 perfections. And at some point, I don't know the exact history, it formed into these 6 perfections for the Mahayana schools. But moving out of discussions of history, it seems like the lively question for me is what's liberating about this kind of path? What about these paths now, these qualities that engages my heart in a different way with the world, myself, and others? How does this cultivation lead to ease and peace and joy and beauty? That seems to be the rub. And so let's look at each of these individually real quick, if we have all this sheet in front of us, and think about a life that is coursing in these different qualities. So we have here the Dana Paramita, and generosity, it seems like a pretty spot-on translation. And there's also giving of oneself is another way to speak about that one. And next in virtue, and feel free, write all over these, make notes on this little piece of paper. It's yours to mess up or decorate. Virtue, this term sila, the one we studied last term, virtue, but also here morality, discipline, proper conduct, and precepts. So really, everything related to dealing with others and how to act in an upright, bright way in the world. And then Kashanti, the practice of patience. And this is a fun one. That there's also the terms of tolerance and forbearance and just endurance. Just to endure things, just to forbear them. I think in a way it's kind of the least sexy of the bunch. That's quite weighty in many ways. And then here, virya, which also translates to just energy and effort and diligence as well as vigor. So really, how do we bring the energy in our life? It's pretty, in a way, it seems a pretty straightforward one as well. And then for dhyana, one-pointed concentration as well as contemplation. And so really this paramita is pointing towards meditation, almost just very explicitly, that meditation practice is said to be the practice of dhyana. How do we gather the mind and become simple and straightforward in our mental dealings with the world, mental, emotional, physical dealings with the world. Then lastly, wisdom or prajna, and the only other translation given here is also insight. Yeah, so it sounds like if you were rocking all of these, you'd be a pretty rockin' person. And in a sense, the teachings really just point you again and again to do these things. And I think it's really beautiful that generosity is called out as the first one. And in a way, it's very much the most straightforward and easy one to practice. If you have something that seems to be yours, give it away. Like, make it not be yours anymore. And that's all you need to do. That's a first step in unraveling, I guess, what we would call wisdom, which is the truth of no self and no other. That there's just whole arising together, and the truth of the Buddha's awakening of not being separate from any being in the entire world. So in a way, we can see how these might string together a very linear path. And in a way, they're often talked about that the very first one you practice is generosity. Just give a gift. Give something away. Begin to loosen up your very firm ideas of what is yours and what's others, what's me and what's another person. And something else we'll spend more time on this next class, but within these 6, there are particular relationships that are quite salient. So actually, couplets from the top to the bottom. So generosity and virtue have particular relationship with each other, patience and vigor, and concentration and wisdom. And here with generosity and virtue, something that we looked at last class was how there's a small sutra that was taught by the Buddha about the 5 indestructible gifts. And those were actually the first 5 precepts, the first 5 parts of the moral code. Not killing, not stealing, not lying, not misusing sexuality, not indulging in intoxicants. And so these, if you are practicing these as your moral and your conduct in the world, you give peace of mind to other beings. That's your gift to them. I think it's quite a beautiful image there. I think it's so easy to get tight around thoughts of morality and virtue, maybe particularly in our Puritan culture as such. But then here in patience and in vigor, talking about the relationship within those, this is actually a place of great study for me, that I think I'm very patient, but actually I think I'm just mostly lazy. And I tend to push everything down, and when someone asks me to be energetic, I can struggle to find that vigor, which actually might come from a bit of me realizing that I'm frustrated with the world in all these little ways that I tend to hide from myself. And when I'm more involved in my own frustration and aware of that, I can actually give rise to this life-giving energy that I tend to mostly just be afraid of. So a little bit bracket around my world. We'll talk about these relationships more later. Well, maybe going into the last one a little bit. This was traditionally the practice of mendicants and monastics and people practicing higher levels of spiritual discipline. So really this is the place where it was traditionally cordoned off that lay people would never, or non-ordained folks would never sit meditation. It just wouldn't be a thing. Your job would be to support the monastics in that practice and sort of receive their wisdom in that way and support their practice. So now we can do it all in the 21st century. Where was I going with that?
Was there a certain time when that change happened?
Very recently. Maybe in the past couple hundred years, but even maybe more like 75. As far as my knowledge goes within our own tradition, there was a point during the Meiji Restoration, the late 1800s, where they really changed what it meant to be a clergy member in Japanese Buddhism in Japan. It used to be regulated by the government that you couldn't eat meat, grow your hair out, or have a family. And they wanted to weaken the monastic institutions, so they did away with those laws, which seemed to really succeeded. Definitely weakened the monastic institutions. And then the whole Soto school redeveloped their kind of way of relating with the school to invite the lay people into more participation. So, anyway, that's a little history I know about that. And so, on this side, in just talking about these things from their positive aspect, the generosity, the virtue, patience, vigor, concentration, and wisdom, really the first teaching here is do those things. Give the gift. Be patient. One of the other ones. Be vigorous. Harvest your energy in certain ways. And I'm always kind of humbled by how important that teaching is. I think since, like for example, with vigor, someplace I'm really studying right now, some things in the world really I naturally feel energized for, and many things I don't. And when I actually turn my heart to saying, actually, I want to put energy into this, like it comes. It's kind of amazing. But if I'm always just looking like, oh, is this going to make me, like, is this going to get me jazzed? I'll just sort of like sit on the fence and do nothing. So this part of the teaching is really important, to just do these things. But also there's quite a big limitation if we get stuck on just the front side of these things. That I think the teachings of the paramitas are inviting into a deeper relationship. That these qualities are not just like positive attributes that I'm trying to make happen, but they're invitations into deep layers of my being that are here and present all the time. So not just something I do or make happen, rather something I unclog, discover, investigate, and realize that these are flowing pools of my being, whether I am aware of that or not. And so in terms of thinking about these as kind of arenas of our being, I want to sort of look at each one individually and kind of point out my own thoughts about what kind of realm is there. And so in looking at, say, for generosity, I would say that this generosity is really fundamentally talking about this place of exchange we experience as a being. And the place that comes to me right away is food, for example. Like you can go up to a tree and pluck off an apple and eat it. That's a thing we experience. And at some point it was out there and that tree's apple, in a sense, and then all of a sudden it's my whole entire life force. And this kind of exchange is really a basis of life that we're living in. And in a sense, the instruction or teaching to give a gift is calling out directly our kind of stinginess and inability to recognize that kind of mutual arising in the world. Are people kind of seeing that? How this can be pointing into a deeper sort of bedrock layer of our being than just, do the good thing, be nice, and give a gift? That it's asking us to call into question the eyes in which we view the world, and what it means to have something, and what it means to receive something, and what it means to give something away. So let's go to the next one. In virtue, what's the other? Morality. So I think this one's just pointing out relationships. That being in relationships with other humans is a fundamental aspect of human life. And in fact, in the ethics class, we talked about this wonderful figure, Levinas, a French philosopher. And he said that actually your whole experience of self is just merely defined by the appearance of others. How could you have a self unless you had others to reflect off of and feel some difference from? So that even being encased in our, short-sighted, selfish world that I oftentimes find myself in, it's already partaking of other people. It's already endowed with that profound connection of relationship. So now with patience. And this one took me a while to, get an image of, and I wonder how well it lands for other people, but encountering difficulty. That is just a base experience of human life. And in fact, so many of our teachings in Buddhist school are saying life is full of suffering, and that the only way we're going to be able to do anything about that is to drink deeply of the first noble truth and face that completely, that life is full of this dissatisfaction. It's full of a kind of anxiousness of not being able to control the world at all. We cannot force our images of how we want life to be, but rather like we're riding a dragon that's kind of eating us whenever it wants. And we live that way, and it's so easy to fall into narratives of, I wonder, everything's so good, I'm sort of privileged, and that's true. I think many of us probably in this room right now are quite privileged in our lives, but the fact of being a human being, Buddhism would call out, is tremendously terrifying. I stepped on a snail the other morning. I don't know if anyone has that experience as they're coming out in springtime. The fragility of life is that present all the time, and we can become numb to it so easily. And so I think in this, patience is calling us directly back to how do you encounter that? Not just the kind of everyday difficulties that we can hold in kind of narratives of our life, but actually just the difficulty of embodiment that we live with all the time. And in vigor, energy. And my question is always, why don't I have it? Why is it that I let myself feel so clogged by really flimsy narratives of life? And the bright interplay with when I can fall through those flimsy narratives and kind of rise beyond any idea I can hold about how I could meet the world. I don't know if any of you have those experiences, but it's very special. And in fact, one of the beautiful things about being in community and being called upon is that, I tend to come to my best when others need me. And I think that's a really quite a special blessing of all sorts of kinds of relationships with people, or even my cat. That we can be called beyond our sort of simplistic, energetic flows through life. And dhyana, or concentration. And this one I wasn't fully satisfied by in my sort of imaging of these realms of being, but I called this one connection. I also thought simplicity of mind might do. But for me at least, and calling out what this perfection is pointing to in meditation. There's the one sense that when I sit down on the meditation cushion, oftentimes I realize I'm a mess, a total mess of being kind of flowing out right here on the cushion right now. My mind's in 1,000 different directions, curious about this and that, worried about this and that. And on the other side, I think what it offers quite immediately is that something appears. I'm connected to something, even if it's a mess, even if it's a total hot mess. I'm connected with that, and that's my world showing up and asking something of me. It's asking for my attention, and I can learn that I have a part to play in whether that connection is sort of enacted, or if on one connection or if in one way that connection is hidden. And the default tendency of living beings, as Buddhism would say, is to hide much of our connection, and that would be the idea of ignorance, and said to be the root of the three poisons in greed, hate, and delusion. That as we begin to investigate our own wildness of mind and being, we discover that we're profoundly connected with whatever is appearing moment by moment by moment. And so in one sense, we're being like washed clean by our own ignorance through meditation practice. And the last one, wisdom or prajna, I called intimacy. I think it's very common to have images of Manjushri, one of the bodhisattvas of wisdom, who carries a sword, and that word like insight and the words like piercing or seeing all the way through tend to accompany the idea of wisdom. But at least, where I am in my flavor of practice right now is that wisdom is the hidden mirror behind all of these, in which it merely just draws you closer to all of the things already present in your life, and you can't see them as separate. And so for me, an image I get when I look at this list of 6, it's as we begin to have any kind of taste of wisdom, all that means is it throws us directly back into all of the stuff of our life with that much greater force, that much more energy, and that much more faith to take on all of the tendrils and sinews of our lives. And so in a way, I don't know if wisdom ever really makes life more clear, but maybe you get more comfortable and at ease in the dark and in the pussy flesh of being a human being, and that you can come to know that kind of limitedness as actually kind of infinitely interesting, as profound terrain that can be explored and navigated, and not just oppressively terrifying. So my point is this, is that when we take up a heart of sincerity to meet the profound depths of our being, we can listen to these different arenas of our life. We can learn from what we find there, and we can discover that we're mysteriously guided when we choose to just encounter. I really like that term, mysteriously guided. That I think it's very easy when we get inspiration for a spiritual path, and we have images of what wizened lives can look like, that we try and force an image on our life, and we want the training plan. We want the 7 steps, and I'll just do one after the other, and then I'll get the feedback I know, and it's all going great, versus something much more reflective and soft, and trusting whatever's appearing as it appears. And requiring something like faith to receive and reflect and to trust yourself in its brokenness and in its muck. And really, as this is quite a high-minded list in many ways. And that when we simply put our intention towards them, they're perfect lures for all the muck. They will be the bright invitation for the sharks to come find you when we put our energy in this way. And so we don't have to begrudge our sincerity. In fact, we should really cherish it, but know that it's going to be pretty partial. It's going to be, it's not going to see the whole picture, but it's really going to be the invitation for, kind of healing that we can't know beforehand. So I'd like to read something to you all from a fascicle of the founder of this school. It's called Self-Receiving and Employing Samadhi, Jijiyu Zanmai. And that word samadhi means something like meditation or profound connection or intimacy. It's a pretty poor translation. It's a hard word to work with. But the self-receiving and employing samadhi. So mostly this is not going to make sense. So I invite you to close your eyes and listen and let it kind of wash over you and feel for whatever tugs on your soul and heart, if anything. Because earth, grass, trees, walls, tiles, and pebbles all engage in Buddha activity, those who receive the benefit of wind and water caused by them are inconceivably helped by the Buddha's guidance, splendid and unthinkable, and awaken intimately to themselves. Grass, trees, and lands which are embraced by this teaching together radiate a great light and endlessly expound the inconceivable profound Dharma. Grass, trees, and walls bring forth the teaching for all beings, common people as well as sages. And they, in accord, extend this Dharma for the sake of grass, trees, and walls. Thus, the realm of self-awakening and awakening others invariably holds the mark of realization, with nothing lacking, and realization itself is manifested without ceasing for a moment. This being so, the meditation of even one person at one moment imperceptibly accords with all things and fully resonates through all time. Thus, in the past, future, and present of the limitless universe, this Zazen carries on the Buddha's teaching endlessly. Each moment of Zazen is equally wholeness of practice, equally wholeness of realization. This is not only practice while sitting. It is like a hammer striking emptiness. Before and after, its exquisite peal permeates everywhere. How can it be limited to this moment? Hundreds of things all manifest original practice from the original face. It is impossible to measure. Know that even if all the Buddhas of all the 10 directions, as innumerable as the sands of the Ganges, exert their strength and with the Buddha's wisdom try to measure the merit of one person's Zazen, they will not be able to fully comprehend it. So I don't really want to speak after that. And for me, he's really pointing to a different kind of image of having a good life than I ever thought. There's something about trust, something about being held, something about that wholeness of practice, even if things sort of look amok for me. And maybe the last thing I'll offer is the opening verse. If I can find it. The opening verse from the. Oh, there it is. Sorry. The opening verse from the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines. It says, call forth as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. Remove the obstructing defilements and clear away all your taints. Listen to the perfect wisdom of the gentle Buddhas, taught for the weal of the world, for heroic spirits intended. Call forth as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. Remove the obstructing defilements and clear away all your taints. Listen to the perfect wisdom of the gentle Buddhas, taught for the weal of the world, for heroic spirits intended. So, as we begin a couple weeks of class together, that's my wish for you all. May we plunder it fully. So yeah, we have about 10 minutes. If anyone wants to share, be about anything I spoke about or either of these pieces of text. And I'll send everyone that full fascicle. It's quite short, it's just 2 pages for people to read if they like. So the floor is yours. Yeah, Pat.
I've also heard samadhi referred to as concentration. What are your thoughts on dhyana and samadhi, the difference?
Oh, say that. Sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
I've often heard samadhi as concentration,
Yeah.
not dhyana, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Dhyana. I was just wondering what, if any, if there are differences in your opinion.
No, concentration is great. I just often, the word concentration can somewhat, we can talk about that when, I don't know, you're trying to do a math problem and you're not feeling concentrated. And so it feels like quite a casual word to me. Oftentimes the word, an image that calls to concentration for me that we use sometimes in the Zen school will be the gathering of mind. So like, for example, sesshin, that term we use for a meditation retreat, means to gather the mind. And so oftentimes I think in a Buddhist religious sense that our concentration will mean inviting in of what is not concentrated. That will be your experience of concentration. So when you sit down on the cushion, for example, and you're aware of all these kinds of wild flows that you weren't aware of before, is actually the movement of concentration. But we won't think it as such because we're so intimate with it, the concentration, that our experiences of disintegration, for example. Yeah, does that get out what you're pointing to? Does that put them?
Yeah.
Yeah. What translation do you like when you think about the word concentration?
Either's fine. I just, this is the first I've heard dhyana.
Jhana.
Dhyana.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I like both, obviously, but you know, just I like what you said was very, very eloquent. Thank you.
Hi,
Hi, Elizabeth.
my name is Elizabeth, and so my question to you is: you mentioned something about it makes you feel when people need you. I I I like to give a lot, and I'm very generous with my time and everything else. And it is a very good feeling to know that people need you, but it can also sound kind of like you're really the one needing them because you have to feel needed. Does that make any sense?
Makes total sense.
And it's just like, am I doing it because of a good heart, which I'm thinking I am, or is it because I want to be needed?
Totally. Yeah, great point, Elizabeth. This is something Dale Wright is really great about talking about these kinds of things in the book, and how there are some, I guess, what would be the right word? I think in some Buddhist circles they'll call certain qualities near enemies of virtues. So, for example, what I hear you saying right now is versus like some image of genuinely giving yourself out of like helping the world versus just trying to mine the world for a certain kind of feedback that makes me feel good. And I think in most practice, we're actually probably pretty mixed about that all the time. And for example, the Dalai Lama also doesn't, he calls it enlightened self-interest. And he says not to be too afraid of it, which I think is very sweet. But also, I think what you're saying is so important that as we investigate these different qualities, how do we find where are the places that we're actually putting our energy to be kind and helpful to the world, and where are we further binding the world to certain needs that we have. And it's hard because you also, I think the only way, we have to make that mistake. Like that mistake is ours to make as we step out, which also makes me really appreciative of this tradition and its emphasis on, for me personally, meditation practice, and how that's a place where I feel into my heart in a certain way and begin to learn more about my own intention in a way that it's very hard for me to do in the moment.
Yeah. Well, another thing, if you don't mind, I won't take too much time, but I have been learning recently on the last couple of years because of circumstances in my life is that for once I have a son that is 24, and just 3 years ago she said, "Mama, you're just too much, you're too overwhelming, you want to do everything for me, let me grow, let me have my own journey," and so that was hard. But it is true, I learned that, I have to let go, and he's his own person and I can't do that. So I am learning to just like let go and just help whenever I'm asked without trying to jump in and do it all, because not a lot of people appreciate that anyway. And it's a hard lesson to learn when you are the giving kind, but it is a good lesson.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Oh, thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing. Yeah. Matthew, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, so part of that discussion really reminded me of the concept of like, when we give something, we're also receiving in that way. And it's really important to keep in mind how we receive that, because there's the ability to just be part of that arising together versus trying to pull somebody in. And where that relationship is. I don't know, that's what was coming up for me.
All I can feel is like amen. I think for me a lot of that exploration is around what is the like just staying in touch with that, and not begrudging my own desire. I think that actually, I feel like I just spent years of spiritual practice trying to kill my desire, versus what is desire that is actually quite wholesome in so many ways, and allowing like the natural lovingness in somewhat I don't know, the wanting to come together and meet the world in kind of a beautiful way, meet the world and other people, and to allow that to be a guide, versus the like image of a saint that is, or I'm completely dried up and I can do this completely selflessly, versus like, no, I actually sort of want to get something from this, and owning that from the beginning. And it feels like that's a much more secure place to step from, even if it feels quite vulnerable and gross in many ways. And that's just my own experience there.
I have a 4-year-old, so I spent a lot of time with Mr. Rogers and Daniel Tiger, and one of those little tidbits is taking care of you is fun for me too. And it's just like, it points to that wholesomeness
Mm-hmm.
in that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then it's great. How do you become sensitive enough to watch that and then know when you need to shift?
Mm-hmm.
That I think is just so amazing. And even if you start, for me, I started to cultivate that when I was nannying 4 boys, I think. And they know when you overextend.
Mm-hmm.
They smell it and they're like, you're full of shit right now.
Yeah, like, and they push. They're like,
Yeah,
"Nope."
yeah, they know you're off your balance, and actually, I found that when I told them I was pissed off at them, or like put down hard rules, and like sort of like grab them a little roughly in a sense with that, and be like, "No, I'm mad at you. I'm not gonna let you do that." They really liked it. Like they felt embraced, even in something that didn't feel so skillful in some ways.
'Cause it's honest.
Yeah. And it's trusting of them too. Like if you can trust yourself to be like that, it allows them to trust their own feelings versus images of being sterile or overindulging, but something more in the middle and something more connected all the way through. Yeah. Well, that puts us at time. So maybe I'll announce our homework briefly. Optional homework. If you want to email me a few sentences about your life and what's interesting about this class for you and just who you are if I don't know you, that would be gratefully received. And the other homework that'd be great if everyone did was just to write quickly, and maybe not with thinking too much about this at all, but which one of these 6 kind of calls to you immediately, if there's one. Or maybe also one that just makes you mad. So whatever really calls to you, and there's no wrong answer here. But it might, say for example, if we get some time in the 4th or 5th class, we might just pick one of these and talk about it the whole class if a number of people kind of have the same bone to pick. So. All right, thank you so much, everyone. And so how we close these classes is by chanting the Pali Refuges. So Pali is a language. It's very close to what the Buddha originally spoke. And refuges is, I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. And we'll chant that. It's quite melodic. And the first, second, and third change. So even if you got after the first one, wait to hear the second one before you dive in all the way.